you've got to build an entire profile on that athlete. And if you're looking just specifically just a CMJ, you're neglecting a whole host of other factors that we should be paying attention to.
Bobby Esbrandt, welcome to VALDCAST.
I appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm super pumped to get this conversation going. I feel like even when I was in undergrad and even in PT school, I'd followed you for a while, and it's cool to be able to connect and have conversations and continue learning from you, because I know there's a lot of people out there that already have learned a lot from the things you put out, and hopefully we can elaborate a little bit more on that today. So before we dive too far into any of the questions, maybe if you want to just give a brief overview of who you are, what you do, and we'll jump in.
Yeah, like I said, my name is Bobby Brandt. I'm a physical therapist by trade, business owner as well, and started Impact Sports Physical Therapy about 8 years ago. We employ a staff of about 10 different PTs. We've got 3 locations throughout the DMV area, and I also have spent about most of the past decade working in Division I sports as well.
That's awesome, man. It's super cool. We're just talking off air about this, but it's very rare that you have an individual that is kind of both, doing a really good job in the business space, but also spending a lot of time as a practitioner, still, as people say, quote unquote, in the trenches, working hard every day as, an elite sports physical therapist, right? In your opinion, there's probably some corollaries between being a successful business person and being a successful physical therapist. In your opinion, what threads are similar between those two disciplines, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, it's a full balancing act, right? I mean, when you first start and you're trying to scale a business, it's your name that you're living off there initially, right? So you building a name for yourself and your practitioners building a name for themselves in the infancy of your business. It's important to you scale. And then as you scale and as you start bringing on more bodies, I think that's where your role starts to change a little bit. And that's kind of the space I'm facing and I'm trying to get into now is, as we've scaled, now we're up to multiple locations. It's okay. Do I need to take a step back a little bit from more of the clinical side, just a little bit, and put a little bit more into that growth business bucket?
Definitely, man. And when you're in this position now, is it how does this transition happen? Do you phase into more of like this mentorship role that you like give with your staff, or give us some of the nuances there?
It's hard, right? I mean, because there is a big demand from a patient caseload standpoint on myself, right? I mean, more being the physical therapist for a university, it's very time consuming. Having all the patients I normally see in clinic is still time consuming. So making sure I'm not neglecting that piece, because one of my fears as a business owner and as a clinician is, okay, well, if I reject these patients, especially a patient I've seen for a long time, are they going to go elsewhere? And when you're a small private practice, and we are a small private practice, that word of mouth, those patient relationships, they're key, and they're the last things you want to sacrifice. I've reached a point now where, I used to work 5 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day, clinical care, a ton of that. I pulled back a little bit, right? So I'm giving about 3 days a week now of clinical care. That gives me 2 days where I can devote stuff where I'm trying to improve some of the resources on the back end of things so that our staffs can live a better life and have an easier time treating. Then, like you said as well, also finding time to sit down with staff one-on-one and have those meetings periodically to make sure that we're on the same page and that we're addressing any concerns that they might have with the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, and it's so true. You mentioned earlier, when you start out, and even as a business of 8 years, your name means everything, and like that is, you guys have to pride yourselves on the outcomes you deliver and the service that you're providing. Early on, it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to see Bobby, right? And now that you guys have grown, it's like, okay, no, like I go to see Impact, and I make sure that, you make sure that as a practitioner, there's some level of continuity of care between clinics, between practitioners. Obviously, you never want to tell them this is exactly what we do, how we do it, and not give them that autonomy. But where are you at now in terms of trying to create some of that continuity of care? What standards are you guys trying to set in place to make sure that when people see Impact or when people see you guys, they know that they're getting a quality result?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that starts with the hiring process from the start, right? Making sure we're bringing on someone who is driven and wants to learn, because as much as we all think we know everything when we're coming out of school, we don't. And even when you're a few years out, I mean, the tech space, like with you guys provide for us, I mean, it's a mountain to climb when you're first starting to look at it. And, I'll tell my staff even now, first 2-3 months I started working with it, it was a whirlwind. Then even 6-8 months out, once you think you know what you're doing, you really don't, right? It takes a lot of time to sit there and do that. So obviously you guys have put out a lot of resources that made our lives a lot easier with making things a little bit more digestible for our staff, so they can sit there understanding that, but also making sure that we're spending time with staff and sitting down and going over different metrics and different testing protocols and understanding, okay, what are we looking at and why are we looking at this, and just putting those puzzle pieces together.
Yeah. I kind of want to zoom in on that a little bit because, with when you take force plates, for example, a lot of times people can grab force plates and they say, you know what, for right now, let's just start by collecting data and let's just do a CMJ, right? And let's call it there, which is great. It's arguably what most people should do of just let's do a constrained assessment and something that we know people can do repeatedly over time. Let's monitor that data. But a lot of times what we see is people hit that phase and then they never really grow out of it, right? It's just like, CMJ becomes the bread and butter and there you go, right? You guys have done a really good job of doing what you said, integrating new tests, reflecting, looking at new resources and understanding how that process unfolds. What's kind of the driving force behind that? And what have you guys found since you started to integrate these new tests?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the CMJ is very easy, and most people can understand that. And for most individuals, they're looking, okay, did jump height go up? Did it go down? It's a very simplistic way to look at things. But when you work with an athlete, you've got to build an entire profile on that athlete. And if you're looking just specifically at just a CMJ, you're neglecting a whole host of other factors that we should be paying attention to. So if you take us working in the post-op space, right? ACL being probably our biggest pathology that we work with. If we're merely just looking at that one little piece, we're neglecting a whole huge sector of what we should be looking at with that patient.
Mhm. And diving more into well, you scroll through your Instagram page and you'll see single leg drop jumps, single leg jumps, run specific ISOs. When you're creating that profile for the individual, what buckets of need or what qualities are you really looking at trying to monitor? And if those sorts of things change, maybe could you give an example of, hey, we did this test, this metric changed, and that changed our plan of care?
Yeah, and I think it's where you have an understanding of how the different metrics impact each other, right? I mean, you sit there and say that force production is that underpinning quality, right? If you've got a weak athlete, they have a hard time generating force. Yeah, they're not going to be powerful. They're not going to be explosive. They're not going to get good reactive strength. So understand how different things build on each other. So yeah, to your point, right? I mean, we're going to be paying attention to max strength. We're going to be looking at the individual's lower extremity power production. We're looking at their ability to produce force, not just at peak levels, but also rapidly. And then looking at that reactive piece, right? Rula Katsufaki, I mean, the research she has put out, showing how sensitive that single metric is at looking at dysfunction in the knee. Like if we're dealing with an ACL, we need to be paying attention to that.
100%. And no, it's super cool to see, and also just being able to juggle the areas that you're in and still making time for some of the research and still making time to make sure, like, hey, at the end of the day, you are, working with an athlete and making sure that, you need to provide a certain service. And so staying up to date on what's necessary is incredibly important. Um, I think a lot of times you've done a really good job in terms of giving back when it comes to knowledge and sharing a lot of things. You make yourself very available online of, doing Q&As or things like that. And a theme that I see a lot is people ask you, hey, Bobby, how do I get into sport? How do I become this sports PT? And maybe instead of it talking about a process or a journey, maybe let's double tap on what are some of the non-negotiables, right? What are the qualities as a physical therapist or as a rehab provider that you need to have if you're going to work in sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the most common question I get, other than, hey, I got pain here. How do I fix it? But look, I mean, I think the first thing is appreciating how competitive sports is, right? So you have to understand that. I mean, if you're in a class of 50, I mean, most individuals in there are going into outpatient, and then out of those people, at least half of those want to get into sports. So no, you've got to find ways that you can differentiate yourselves. And as a new grad, that's hard, right? Because maybe you don't have experiences that really make you look like you're a sports guy. First thing is, you got to be a sponge. You've got to accept that you don't know everything. You got to want to have a desire to learn. One of the biggest things is, and that's a big limitation I see for individuals, right? They don't want to put in the time. They don't want to volunteer their time.
Yeah.
My first job at a PT school, I worked at, your typical private practice sports and orthopedic clinic where, if someone my age walked in, that was an athlete in my moon, right? I wasn't treating youth athletes. I wasn't treating professional athletes, collegiate athletes. And so I had to make a decision there. How am I going to get myself out there? And obviously the books and learning was one of those things, but I also wanted to I got to get patients in front of me. So, I mean, I volunteered my time every Saturday. I emailed every high school in the area, every club team in the area, every semi-pro team in the area, and one team got back to me, right? And it was a semi-pro team an hour away that said, hey, yeah, we'd like to do a relationship. So what I do, I drove myself out there an hour every Saturday night, sat there at their games, testing whatever I need to do just to start to build relationships. And I think that's a big deal. I mean, everyone wants to have the instant gratification, but it takes time to build a following. It takes time to build a caseload and especially of what you want to see. So make sure that you're willing to put in the work, take the time, and better yourself so that you're able to then deliver the good care to that athlete when they eventually do walk in through your door.
Yeah, exactly. And that last point I think is so important because for so long I think people say, "Well, I want to be in that environment so that I know that I can learn and understand how what true athlete rehab is like." And I think that's a very valid point, right?
Yeah.
Because at some point you do need some on the job training, regardless. As a physical therapist, you know that every day you walk in, you're going to learn something or something's going to change within your process, no matter how small or big. And I think that a lot of times, though, practitioners will come in with this idea of I just need to start seeing athletes and then I'll understand. But a lot of times it's the in this case the eggs got to come before the chicken. Like you have to have that skill set beforehand.
And that could be the nail in the coffin for them if they were to give them that thing to begin. Because I mean, if there's one thing an athlete can do, especially they've been around rehab before, they know how to tell if you're full of BS or not. Yeah. So you've got to know your P's and Q's. You got to be on the ball because if you've got an elite athlete that walks in the door, the second they see you're a fraud, they're out that door and you don't have that person coming back.
Yeah, definitely. So, in your experience now, 8 years into owning your own practice and having worked with, at this point, hundreds of elite level athletes, what do you think are some of those things that athletes come in and look for and say, oh, okay, this is what makes Impact different? What are the areas that really separate you guys? And how does that kind of help with the buy-in process with the athletes?
So I think early on, our environment was a key differentiator, right? I mean, when we started 8 years ago, there weren't a ton of sports performance PT clinics. So having a gym where, you had everything under the sun, you didn't have 10-pound dumbbells and a bunch of mini bands. You had turf space, you had racks, you had the environment where an athlete could train like an athlete. That was a big one. I think it's still a big one to this day because not everyone operates that way. The tech space has been really big for us in recent years. I think when you can look, building rapport with the athlete and your words are very important. But when you can put tangible numbers behind your words and the athlete can have a better grasp of what you're saying and what these numbers mean, that means the world for them, right? And it creates buy-in on both ends, right? The athlete sits there and sees, hey, yeah, I know I'm going to test every 5-6 weeks. This guy's telling me he's working on X, Y, and Z right now, and I should see some yielded benefit in a few weeks. And if we don't see that, did the athlete dog it? Did I dog it? Is there something I have to mix up? So it holds both parties accountable.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things too where I think so often communication is such a key point within rehab. And it's one of those things that especially people working in sports never think about. They say, well, I gotta upskill on my S&C. I gotta upskill on my, soft tissue skills or whatever it is. And it's rarely ever is it, oh, I need to upskill on my communication. I think the value that sometimes tech provides is you still need to be a good communicator and you still need to have the true quote unquote hard skills. But what tech can provide is you relate to the athlete so much more because you say, hey, when you say you don't have that pop in your step right now or when you're accelerating, this is the metric that we're looking at. And this is why. Because then that athlete says, okay, boom, that's my new goal. And then it allows them to zero in and focus on something that makes them so much more bought in on the process.
Yep, without a doubt.
I love it, man. So right now, obviously, you guys have had tech for a long period of time. I'm sure, have gone through the ups and downs of learning and maybe unlearning some traits and some skills. What's next for you guys? What are you looking to maybe try to integrate in the future? What are you looking to kind of upskill when it comes to what you're doing within the clinic? What's next for Impact?
No, that's a great question. I think we're always on that lookout for what is that next big thing in the tech space for us. I'm pretty happy with what we have now. I think the biggest thing is getting all of our staff to the same level of understanding on it. And obviously, us having, 10 plus different members, there's different variability of understandings when it comes to those things. So making sure we're all on the same page, making sure we all speak the same language, make sure that every athlete that walks in that door, they're getting the same experience and they're making sure they're getting all their deficits addressed in the proper way.
Mm-hmm. I love that. one last thing, and it just kind of comes to mind knowing the specific region that you're in. You know, the DMV area is home to some pretty big players in the sports rehab space, right? And so when it comes to that, where that like there's I can only imagine that there's a bit of a turf war and those sorts of things. We kind of already talked about, you know, what differentiates you guys, but what are some things that you feel like you guys are doing differently? And what are some things that you think that, you know, really just create the impact experience something different?
I'll take it back to what you said about the soft skills.
Mm.
I think our ability to create relationships with those athletes is paramount. You know, we've had a couple patients, you know, term our gym club impact. So it's that sort of environment when you walk in. It's different than most out there, and you hit the nail on the head, right? There are a lot of big hitters in our area. Even with that said, we pride ourselves on staying very, very niche in the mark that we treat, right? So I know some of our competitors, and they'll tout that they treat patients at this age and under, this age and under. No one's seeing a younger, more athletic clientele than us, and I think that's what attracts a lot of those people back into our office.
That's awesome, man. Um, well, Bobby, I really appreciate you coming on. It's been super cool just to kind of learn about what you guys are doing, get a better understanding for the tech that you guys are implementing and the way in which you're doing it, because I think you guys are doing something really special there. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. If there's anything you guys have coming up, or if there's any areas that you want to kind of give out to the people and make sure that they know, or where people can follow up with you and learn more from you, let them have it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Instagram is our biggest thing. You know, Impact Sports PT is our business page, and Bobby Sports PT is my own personal handle.
Amazing. Bobby, thank you so much.
Awesome.